right. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. Hello, and welcome to our latest Transportation Tidbits. Super excited to have you here. Couple quick reminders. If you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A feature or the chat. I will be monitoring both throughout this presentation. We are also recording, and this will be posted on the website likely by end of day tomorrow. It will also be emailed to anybody that registered for this event. And with that, I will kick it over to Ben Kopitzke and Kathy Fry. Thanks for joining us, guys.
All right. Good noon, everyone. I'm Ben Kopitzke. I am a finance consultant with School Financial Services. It still says team, Kathy. We're a bureau
Yes,
now. We had a
yes.
reorg. But I'm with School Financial Services at DPI. I've been here almost a decade. I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kathy Fry. We have both held the position of school transportation consultant on our team, bureau. But that'll actually be transitioning to one of our colleagues, and we have her contact information at the end of the talk. But today, we're going to cover the wonderful world of transportation to private schools. Now, by the end of today's talk, we really hope you will be able to identify who needs to be transported to private schools. Along with that is who you can transport to private schools, how those students can be transported, how much aid you will receive for transporting them, and when you will receive it, along with how it's calculated. And we'll be wrapping up with what we at DPI do and do not oversee regarding transportation. You might be surprised by the list. It's probably a little bit more limited than you think for what we actually do. But as a very quick sky-high overview of pupil transportation in general, public school districts must transport resident 4K to 12 pupils who live 2 miles or more from the nearest public school they're entitled to attend. So 2 miles or more. Now, public schools must transport to private school resident 4K to 12 pupils who live 2 miles or more from the private school they attend, reside in the private school's approved attendance area, and their private school cannot be more than 5 miles from the public district's boundary as measured by the usually traveled route. We're going to dive into that in about a dozen slides. Now, if pupils reside under 2 miles from their school, the public district may claim transportation aid if those pupils are affected by unusually hazardous areas, whether they live directly in the unusually hazardous area or they must transit through the unusually hazardous area. Then transportation is required. And of course, public districts may report their ridership in Sapphire to be reimbursed, that is, receive aid for providing their prior year transportation. So, to understand private school transportation, we first must actually understand public school transportation. There is significant, almost complete overlap between the two areas. So we're going to start off with going through the 7 areas on our website for transportation to public schools, starting with the city option and ending with alternative vehicles.
And that's me. So the city option is only available to districts who are within a class 1 city over 40,000 in population. In which case the district may decide to use city transportation for the students. Some school districts have elected to invoke city option only for students in certain grade levels. For example, a school district may provide transportation for pupils in grades K to 8, but not for pupils in grades 9 to 12. However, you may not, the district may not use the city option to deny transportation attending private schools. So the transportation provided must be through a common carrier, like a city bus. And again, the districts may invoke that option for certain grade levels and not for others. Not all eligible districts rely on the city option for transporting pupils. I don't know of very many districts that use this option. It's not very common.
And of the ones that we know of, many of them do differentiate by grade level. Because we've had calls from various parents asking, oh, my kid's now in 6th grade, so they're suddenly required to use the bus. Yes, that is your school district policy. They have the city option. Here's some more information.
Go to the next one. Routes and schedules. There is no statutory requirement regarding the amount of time a pupil may spend being transported to and or from school. This is a question that we get quite often from parents who don't like the fact that their kids are on the school bus for 90 minutes a day or 90 minutes one way, but there is actually no statute governing the amount of time that a student may spend on a school bus. You as a district have the right to the authority to establish, administer, and schedule your bus routes. What that means is if you want to have a centralized pickup point for an area, you are free to do that. Some districts do door to door, or the end of the driveway or the end of the little lane or whatever, but you are not required to do that, and you get to decide where those bus stops are going to be and what your routes are going to be. Law does not require that a pupil be picked up and or dropped off at their home. So again, you may establish common bus stops in an area where the students need to walk to a bus stop to be picked up. There's no statutory requirement regarding the distance a pupil may be expected to walk to a bus stop. And individual boards may adopt policies establishing minimum duration, distance, etc. I know in the district that I worked in prior to DPI, we did have a maximum number of minutes that the students the goal was to not have them on the bus any longer than that. I believe it was like 70 minutes. Our district is pretty rural. Again, there is no statute governing the amount of time that a student spends on a school bus. To and from childcare provider in lieu of home. So you may, as a district, decide that you would like to transport students to a childcare or before and after school care program instead of transporting the students to their residence. If you do that, you're not permitted to charge a fee, but you may claim aid for that transportation. You may provide transportation for resident pupils for whom transportation is not required to and from a child care provider. If you do, the school may charge a fee, but may not claim categorical transportation aid. And you may waive any portion of the fee for anyone unable to pay. And this is pretty standard. When you do this, I believe the statute says that you still would count the mileage as from home to school.
Is there a question, Caitlin? I thought I saw something pop up.
Yes, I will be posting this presentation later today, Dawn.
Sounds good.
Outside of school district boundaries, in general, parents are responsible for transporting students who attend a school under a tuition waiver or open enrollment. That is in general. If a student is open enrolled to your district and they live just outside of your boundaries, the parent is responsible. The district of attendance is required only to transport pupils within its boundaries. But you may provide transportation for those students, but the non-resident district is prohibited from picking up or dropping off students within the boundaries of the resident district without permission from the resident district. There could be some reasons why a district may want to do this and want to give the permission. For instance, if there is a registered sex offender near where the students are waiting for the bus. That did happen in my district, we had an area that was just over into the next district, not too far. And on the street where the kids who were open enrolled to our district lived, there was a registered sex offender, and we agreed between the two districts that our bus would go into that other district and pick up those students. So there are reasons why a district may want to cross the boundaries and why another district may give permission for that school district to come into its boundaries and pick up students. But it does have to be agreed upon between the two districts. Joint legal custody. When a parent requests a district to provide transportation for a pupil from or to an agreed upon location within the school district, if they have joint legal custody, that is something that needs to be done by the district. The school district may not charge a fee for doing this.
All right. So non-required transportation. So districts may, again, emphasis on may, provide transportation to pupils when it's not specifically required by law, but this has to be decided at your annual or special meeting. A key facet of this provision is that you must have reasonable uniformity in the minimum distance for public and private pupils. You can't say, we're going to transport students who live outside of 1 mile to public school. We're going to provide transportation for that 1 to 2 mile range, but we're going to keep private school pupils at the 2 mile range. Can't do that. Got to be uniform. Next, districts may provide non-required transportation to public or private pupils if the parent or guardian puts in a request. Now, on a recurring theme, the district may charge a fee for such transportation, and they may also waive any portion of that fee for anyone unable to pay. But when you charge the fee, you cannot claim the categorical transportation aid. And again, public school districts may, but they are not required to provide transportation for extracurricular activities. That's a question we got relatively frequently. Even if the extracurricular activity is an hour or two away, they are not required to, by law, provide transportation to it. Now, there are numerous methods for providing pupil transportation services. DPI recognizes that the absolute safest method of transporting pupils to school is in school buses. However, under 121.551, there are a variety of options for school districts to provide transportation. We have everything from common carrier to contract with another school board to parent contracts or to the purchase and operation of a motor vehicle, which we'll go into detail on the next slide. Now, a crucial detail to remember about the method of providing transportation. The method is determined by the school board, not the pupil's parent or guardian. Okay, school board gets to decide. They can obviously receive input from the parent or guardian, but the school board gets to decide. Now, if it comes down to using an alternative vehicle, there's only a couple stipulations in statute, but they are very important. So alternative vehicles fall into just 2 categories. First, there's the motor vehicle transporting 9 or fewer passengers in addition to the operator, the driver. And then there's a motor vehicle transporting 10 or more passengers in addition to the driver and used only temporarily to provide emergency pupil transportation. A bunch of buses break down with the weather, there's bad accidents, some sort of emergency has to arise. There are requirements for alternative vehicle drivers that are detailed in statute. Pretty basic. Driver has to be at least 18, have a driver's license. There are certain physical condition requirements. They cannot have been convicted of certain motor vehicle crimes. But crucially, the drivers are not required to have the school bus endorsement. So it's easier for them to drive these alternative vehicles. And yes, the passenger limit of 9 is very strict. We actually relatively frequently received questions from both parents, districts, and car dealerships about the size of vans that they could or should sell to school districts, because school districts inquired about 15 passenger vans, which are a no-go. You want 9 seats plus the driver at most. Otherwise, it has to have all of the same safety equipment as a school bus if it is larger than the 9 passengers. Are there any questions before we dive into the specific private school section of the talk?
There is one in the chat. So this person has a student in foster care who chooses to go to an elementary school off of their bus routed elementary school. The foster family provides transportation. Now the parent has child 1 day a week and can't transport the child to the chosen elementary school. Are we required to transport this child 1 day per week?
No. It's not right, Kathy? I believe statute is the public school they're entitled to attend.
Right.
So it's the closest, like however the school district breaks up which elementary school or middle school or high school you're supposed to go to, you are entitled to transportation to that school. We had a question here in Madison that was similar. A family was saying, hey, we live more than 2 miles from our elementary school. Why aren't we getting a ride? Well, you chose to go to that one. Your local school that you were, initially assigned to is under 2 miles. You are not, the district is not obligated to provide that transportation. Kathy, any thoughts
Thank
on
you.
that? All right. So now transportation to private schools. As you can see, there is significant, almost complete overlap regarding transportation to private schools and transportation to public schools. The two differences, the two additions really that you'll notice are pupil eligibility and private school attendance area. So pupil eligibility, I touched on this early, but I'm going to go over it again because all of the following criteria must be met for a resident pupil to be eligible to receive transportation to a private school. And so I don't forget, you see this is under 121.54 2B1. I highly recommend that everyone in attendance seriously sits down and reads through 121.54, possibly 121.58, 121.55. Read through the statutes in their entirety. Just read through them once, start to finish, maybe highlight, take some notes. There is a ton of very useful information in there, and just knowing roughly what you can point to when you get questions from your board or questions from the parents. 121.54 has a lot of it. So all of these criteria must be met. The pupil lives 2 miles or more from the private school. The pupil has to live within the private school's approved attendance area, and the private school is located within the boundaries of the pupil's resident school district or not more than 5 miles beyond the boundaries of the school district as measured along the usually traveled route. Again, at least 2 miles from the school. Private school cannot be more than 5 miles beyond the boundaries of the school district along the usually traveled route. So not some circuitous route through the boonies, usually traveled route. The 5-mile boundary is very strict in statute. There's actually a footnote, if you look at state statute, where there is a private school that was 5 miles and 127 feet, I believe. And the public district did not have to provide transportation because it was beyond 5 miles. So all of those criteria must be met. Additionally, private schools are required to identify any pupils who may qualify for transportation by May 15th of each year. Yes, in anticipation of the upcoming fall. Again, Private schools, the onus is on the private school. They must identify pupils who may qualify for transportation by May 15th. It is not the public school district is supposed to reach out and seek out the offices of the private schools. The onus is on the private schools to provide the information by May 15th. Now, school boards may choose to extend the notification deadline. Not business managers, not district administrators, school boards may choose to extend the deadline. This means that in our wonderful local control state, there are many districts that have a firm May 15th deadline. If the student is not on the list by May 15th, they are not going to be transported. Other districts have much more flexible deadlines to the point where at any point during the school year, students may be added to the transportation roll and then either be transported directly or have a parent contract, for instance. There's also the spectrum from May 15th to the end of the school year, where districts will do an August 1st deadline or the first day of school deadline or first day of second semester. However you do it, talk about it with your board, have it written down, and have it publicly available so that individuals know what the deadline is for your district. Also, be consistent from year to year. If you keep that August 1st deadline, keep the August 1st deadline. If you're going to be absolute on May 15th, keep it absolute.
I just like to jump in here quickly. When I first started at DPI, I was the transportation person, and I found that many districts did not have these agreements in place with their private schools. I've always encouraged people to get that done, because it will come back to bite you if you don't have something in writing, or it could. The other thing is to try to mesh your calendars with your private schools as much as possible, because you are required to transport those students even if you don't have school. And that's going to be an extra cost if you've got a private school that starts in mid-August, because they don't have to follow the same rules that public schools do. You're going to have 2 weeks of transportation for just those kids. So work with your public school or your private schools as much as possible to mesh your calendars, your start and end times as much as you can. It will be to everyone's benefit to have that in writing. I will tell you that the first snow day that our local district had after I started with DPI, there were lots of calls from districts saying that the private school doesn't want to let out early. What do we do? Well, you're really on the hook to transport those kids. So get those things kind of worked out in the summer before school starts, because it will help you in the end.
Thank you. We've had a number of districts that had significant discrepancies between the number of kids that they thought they should be transporting versus the number that the bus company was reporting being transported. I believe one district, it was something like 24 kids should have been transported, were on the list by the private school, and 96, fourfold, 96 kids were on the buses, and the district was paying to transport them when it should have been a quarter of that. So the communication is vital, and once you get it ironed out, it's much smoother sailing year to year. But if you have any questions, please reach out, or reach out to the private school. But again, it is their responsibility to identify the pupils. But public districts are not required to provide transportation to non-resident private school pupils, even if the private school is within your district boundaries. So again, just remember that you could, but with permission and so on, but you do not have to provide transportation to the non-resident private school pupils.
And that goes along with that 5 mile from 5 miles from the edge of the boundary rule. Just because a student that attends a private school within your district lives within 5 miles of your boundary, that is not your responsibility. That is the resident district's responsibility to transport those students.
Absolutely. So I was curious about this, thinking about trends in private school transportation and private school enrollment. So this is the last decade. This data is from WiseDash. Um, so just looking at the green is the private third Friday in September count. The blue is the public third Friday in September count. And I knew that over time, just due to demographic shifts and the pandemic and large graduating classes, I knew that the public numbers were going down. And we can see that from 2019-20 to 2020-2021, there was a drop of about 25,000 kids. Private numbers also went down, but when you do the math, the drop in public numbers was about twice the size, twice the magnitude of the drop in private numbers. However, since 2021, public count has continued to go down, dropping almost another 25,000 since then, whereas private actually started to increase in 21-22. It's back down a little bit for 24-25. We'll see what happens with 25-26. I initially thought that the percentage of private as the total of public and private was had gone up a lot more than it actually has. It's gone up only about 1.2 percentage points over the last decade. There are other factors to consider, though, that are beyond the scope of this talk. The cap on vouchers is going away next year, and any legislative action. But just as a little bit of background, this is what the landscape looks like right now for third Friday counts and proportion of students in private schools. Now, the attendance area. So the two differences, again, the two additions for private school transportation are pupil eligibility and the private school attendance area, which is the specific geographic area designated by the governing body of the private school from which its pupils attend. And it has to be approved by the school board of the district in which the private school is located. Now, the governing bodies, the structures of those can vary by private school, but the base premise of the attendance area is consistent, right? The geographic area. Now, the attendance area has a deadline, or the private school has a deadline of April 1st of every year. Each private school must submit its proposed attendance area for the next school year to the school board of every district that has territory within the proposed attendance area. So the potentially rolling deadline for the list of students is May 15th, but the absolute deadline for the attendance area is April 1st. If a proposed attendance area is not submitted by April 1st, the existence attendance area does remain in effect. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. The attendance areas typically include a description and/or a map of the territory. And I imagine that many years running in a row, they probably don't change. But those are the two key additions for transportation to private schools. And I imagine Kathy's going to chime in and say that many districts don't actually have the attendance area on hand, or they haven't received an updated version in a decade or more. So this is another thing to add to your checklist. In addition to an accurate list of students from the private school, have an updated attendance area.
Just a couple of anecdotes on that. Yes, you're right. Many districts don't have this in place. Many districts have just done gentlemen's agreements. You know, we'll pick your kids up, we'll drop them off at the bus, no problem. Again, having it in writing is going to help make sure that you have everything in line, and the private school. So again, if you don't have this done, I would highly recommend contacting your private schools and making them aware of this statute. Private schools are asking for more and more from public schools these days, and if you have these agreements in place, at least you've got a starting point.
And again, they are statutory requirements.
Yes.
This isn't just, something you're asking for or ask them to overextend or, create extra work. These are statutory requirements.
Quick question that came in. What if a new family that requests private school moves into the area after the deadline is passed?
That is
Is
up to the school. Oh, sorry.
is the district required to transport, and is it required to have board approval?
The board would have to extend the deadline.
Mhm.
Let's say it's November 1st. If it's well after May 15th, and the board, it is absolutely their prerogative if they wish to extend that deadline. The only thing
You may want to even consider having a policy on this,
yes.
because you've got somebody that moves in, say February, and you you are not required to transport them. However, you don't want to alienate your private schools. Say you've got a K-8 school and all those kids generally go on to high school in your district because there's no private school for 9-12. You want to work with your private schools as much as possible, and have, if you have a policy in place, that does not mean that you can't do something and override the policy or waive the policy to accept this kid on the bus route at that point. If you do accept the student, then you can claim them for transportation aid at any point during the year. So there are advantages and disadvantages. If you want to stick strictly to a policy that says no, if you're not here by December 1st, you just have to tough it out for the rest of this year, and we can get you on the list for next year. That's really up to the board.
Yep, and that's where I value consistency in this sort of decision, because just like Kathy said, have a policy. It is up to the board if they wish to provide transportation or the parent contract, but they do not have to. So, great question. But again, it varies. It varies widely. There are a number of districts that are very strict on the May 15th. There are a number of districts that allow it pretty much whenever. Make sure that I think I touch on this soon, but for parent contracts, have deadlines. We have questions at the end of the school year every year. Oh, the parent finally turned in the parent contract on June 30th. Do we still have to pay it out? Or they turned it in July. Do we have to pay it out? Have these clear policies clearly written out in the parent contracts, exact deadlines, and then you don't have to worry about gray areas or as much pushback. Now, something that affects transportation to both public and private schools potentially is unusually hazardous areas. Now, school districts may deem certain areas certain areas may be deemed unusually hazardous as put forth by the school district, and then the district has to provide transportation for pupils who live under 2 miles from their school. And an unusual hazard, as the name implies, it's more than an ordinary hazard, but it seriously jeopardizes the safety of pupils. Now, to create the unusually hazardous transportation plan, districts need to create or update, I should say, because almost 90% of districts have a UHT plan in place. But to create or update a UHT plan, districts need to submit the following to DPI. Most crucially, an approval letter from the county sheriff that confirms the designated areas are hazardous. Not just a letter from the school board or business manager or administrator. It's a letter from the sheriff that says, yes, these areas are indeed hazardous. We need maps with scales that show all UHT areas. The scales help us see that it's the areas that are under 2 miles from the schools. And we have to have school board minutes showing approval of the UHT plan. After DPI approval, which can happen 30 to 60 days after we receive the materials, the district is eligible for state aid, which is only up to $15 per pupil per year right now for transporting the pupils affected by the unusually hazardous area. Now, two things. Affected by the unusually hazardous area, if a student must transit through an unusually hazardous area, and they cannot get around it in under a 2-mile path to school, then that they are counted as hazardous and have to be transported. Second, UHT plans stay in effect until they are modified or rescinded. We don't have exact counts because, again, there's almost 90% of districts have UHT plans in place. Some of those UHT plans have not been updated for literal decades. And some of those updates just carried forward policies put in place decades before. So in certain districts, there's literally, let me think, almost 50-year-old designations that are still in place. And I mean, new subdivisions pop up, railroads go defunct. There's safer crossings put in, there's better sidewalks put in, shoulders are widened, there's, pedestrian bridges. There are many factors that could either have more kids who need to be transported because there's a new business that has a lot of trucks coming in and out and it's not safe to walk past anymore for young kids. On the opposite side of the spectrum, there might be safer areas where you are providing transportation to kids who live under 2 miles from school, but now the sheriff would deem it a safe walking route to school in under those 2 miles. So please, this is my plug. We're going to be sending out a reminder soon. Take a look at your district's UHT plan. And if it needs to be updated, please do so. It's easiest to update them right away after the school year ends. And then you can get communication out to either, hey, you're going to be transported at the start of the next year, or, because of the sheriff's designation, you no longer will receive transportation. But it gives parents plenty of time to figure out their transportation plans. I think I saw another question come in, Caitlin.
You did. What if a private school indicates that they do not have an attendance area? Do we just follow the more than 2 miles but less than 5 miles from our school district boundary?
The private school, by statute, must provide an attendance area by April 1st of each year.
Awesome. And then there is another question. Is crime in the area considered an unusually hazardous condition? And I think he means outside of what Kathy discussed earlier, like a sex offender that is known to be living in the area.
In 2 slides, I will be going over a bunch of that. So good question. Keep it in mind for like 2 slides. So on the map front for unusually hazardous transportation, here are 2 great examples, actually. I did just take screenshots, but the right one did have a scale on the map. The left one has a scale as well. The left one comes from a much fancier report, you might say, done by a third-party company that looks at everything from the number of vehicles to their average speed. It's a great report for determining unusually hazardous zones. It does not have to be that complicated. The map on the right, the district, worked with the sheriff, and the areas highlighted in blue have been deemed hazardous. Now, as I mentioned earlier, and I think I even have it mentioned one more time, the upper right area of the right map is not highlighted in blue. But to get to school, any student would have to walk along the road marked in blue, the unusually hazardous road. So students living at 1336, 1342, 1352, etc., would indeed need to be transported. Same thing with 1440, 1434, etc., on that cul-de-sac in the middle, because there is no, safe way for them to get to school in under 2 miles around that. Those are dead ends, but they have to traverse unusually hazardous areas to get to school. Now, you can have communal bus stops even in an unusually hazardous area. You just might want to think about how far kids are needing to traverse these areas defined as unusually hazardous to get to the bus stop. but that is a local decision. Now, on that question, statute does not specify conditions that constitute an unusual hazard. For instance, any speed limit over 35 miles an hour, anything with 4 lanes, no sidewalk, like that is not spelled out, defined in statute. Now, some or all of these criteria and conditions are often used to assist local entities in determining whether an area is hazardous. Age of pupils. Certain districts have different ranges for picking up kids. It might be a mile through 3rd grade and then a mile and a half through 6th grade, and then it's 2 miles. If there's no crossing guards or poor visibility, or there's no sidewalks, high volume of traffic, the shoulder is really narrow, or you can also have temporarily hazardous areas, such as the street repairs. We've had that, and then it's going to be in place for 2 years, and then it's back to the status quo. As for crime, that would be something to discuss with the county sheriff. Now, if an individual is aggrieved by an aspect of a UHT plan or the lack of a UHT plan, or they disagree with what the sheriff says, they may file an appeal with DPI. At first, they go to the school board, but then it can also be filed with us. So if usually individuals reach out directly to us if that's the case. If you have any questions about that, please do reach out. But my last note on UHT is, if you're one of the, 40, 50 districts that don't have a UHT plan, just think if you can think of any areas, within the 2 miles that you think might be hazardous. It's probably worth looking at. And again, if you haven't updated your plan in a while, please do so.
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about aid. Aid is paid on the previous year's transportation records. So aid that's paid out in January of this year, that was just paid out, was from the 24-25 school year. The formula is based on the number of students that are riding your bus in specific categories. There are several different mileage categories. There's a different rate of reimbursement for each of those categories. The total appropriation for 2026 and 2027 is $24 million. That is a some certain amount, which means that if the claims are more than 24 million, those will be prorated. However, the last 4 or 5 years that I know of, there's always been a little bit of extra left at the end. The remaining balance, then it's paid out in January, the bulk of it, and the remaining balance is then recalculated after audit happens and after any adjustments are made, paid out in June. Summer and interim transportation is also aided, but it is at lower rates, and there is no reimbursement for UHT zones over the summer. Students who ride only specialized transportation per an IEP are not included on the regular transportation report. However, if they ride a specified type of transport several days a week, and then the other times they ride the regular school bus, they can actually be claimed both ways. Or say you've got a kid who rides the specialized transport in the morning and rides the bus home in the afternoon. They are actually able to be aided in both of those areas. So this is the amount of aid that has been given out in the last several years by category. 0 to 2 miles. This is just an example of a district's report. This district had in 2021 42 students in the hazardous zone. In 21-22, that went down to 32, then back up to 35 in 22-23, and then in 23-24 went down to 21. And that's can be logical depending on, kids who may only ride to a school that's nearby and they're in the hazardous zone when they're in the younger grades, and they progress through. But these are the categories: 0 to 2 miles, 2 to 5 miles, 5 to 8 miles, 8 to 12 miles, and over 12 miles. So you can kind of see this particular district has had kind of a little bit of a roller coaster over the years, in the number of students that ride the bus.
Well, we do ask districts to explain greater than 10% variances. It could be, we just talked about UHT zones. If certain areas were deemed no longer hazardous, then there'd be fewer kids to transport in that 0 to 2 mile category. We also do ask that you make sure that you are looking at the correct school year and time period regarding summer versus regular transportation. Every year we have just a few districts that realize very late that they entered it over the wrong school year, or they entered summer for regular or regular for summer. So please just take a look at the top of your screen and double check that you're in the right area.
Right. If you provide transportation over the summer, that's like the beginning of the fiscal year. That would be the first thing that you're reporting in the fiscal year. Even if your summer school is in June, that still would go into the following fiscal year. So it's a little confusing sometimes which summer school numbers you're reporting. But just keep in mind that the summer school would be basically the first thing that you would report as far as transportation goes for a fiscal year. And then your regular transportation aid, you normally report that at the end of the school year in June. But it is, again, for the year that has just passed.
And also, while we ask for an explanation of the variance, you should absolutely have an understanding of why any variances exist from year to year, or sudden changes in the 0 to 2 mile category over time, or the 8 to 12 or the over 12. Just have even a rough understanding of families moving in and out, or whatever the cause is.
Yes, because your auditors will ask you if there's a big variance. They will definitely be taking a look at that.
Caitlin, did a question come in?
Yes. Was the transportation of homeless students discussed? We have a student who had lived in our district but is now homeless outside of our district. Are we responsible to transport the students to our school where they are still enrolled?
I believe so. We are not really experts on homeless students, but in my recollection, homeless students are basically tied to the district of origin. So if they start in a school district at the beginning of the year, but they become homeless and are outside of the district, the district of origin is still required to transport them.
That is my understanding as well. I think we've had one question about homeless students in all the years that I know that we've been discussing. So please reach out to us with more specifics.
We can put you in touch with the people who are really well versed in the homeless student issues too, and they can help you as well. So this slide just basically shows the amounts of reimbursement for each student who is within a certain mileage category. So in your UHT zones, it's $15 per student during the regular school year, and it does not apply during summer or interim sessions. 2 to 5 miles is $35 a pupil, $10 in summer and interim. 5 to 8, $55 per pupil, $20 in summer and interim. Over 8 to 12, $110 per pupil, $20 per summer and interim. And then over 12, this category, the amount just went up. It is now $450 per student over 12 miles.
Oh, one last note. Districts, if you're unable to add in the 0 to 2 mile category and you feel you should be able to, please let us know. We have to activate that field after you have an approved UHT plan.
And we try to get that activated when the plan passes, but If you do go in to do your report and you know that you have a UHT approved and it's not showing up there, then let us know and we can get that opened up for you. Aid eligibility before any proration is calculated in Sapphire. So if you put this data into Sapphire, it will automatically calculate the amount that you will be receiving. There is also a workbook for you to use that has all those calculations in it, so you can gather your data before you go in to do the report in the workbook, and you can kind of get an idea of where you're at as far as reimbursement. High cost transportation aid. This one is really difficult to predict because the payouts are based on everyone's information, what everyone has done over the year. Every district is factored in that provides transportation, which most districts do. There are several. I think there's only like 5 districts in the state that don't provide any transportation at all. And it's really hard to predict what you're going to get here, because you could have a district that buys 6 buses, and that's going to make their cost go way up for that 1 year. So that's going to mean they're going to take a bigger share of what's appropriated for this. So for districts with per pupil transportation costs less than 135% of the statewide average, and that is a new amount this year for the 26 to 25 to 27 biennial budget. That was changed. It was 140%. I think they're doing that because we really have not been using up all of the appropriation over the last few years. If your cost is more than 135% of the statewide average based on your prior year data, and your membership is under 50 per square mile, the appropriation is still $22,800,000, but it is now the percentage over the average is now lower, so that should include a few more districts. There is a stopgap for districts that qualified for high cost aid in 1 year prior but do not qualify this year. You're eligible for a payment of 50% of the prior year award only in the year becoming ineligible. So in other words, if you were eligible last year, you're not this year, you're still eligible for a 50% payment. And there is no longer a cap on that stopgap. And this amount is some certain. In other words, it will be prorated if necessary, and this is paid out in June. When I was doing the transportation aid, I would have districts calling me, asking me for an estimate during their budgeting period, and we really cannot predict this. It is very, very difficult to predict. It really depends on, again, if a district decides that their fleet is old and they need to replace buses, that's going to make their costs go up for that year. There are a lot of factors that go into this calculation, and it's next to impossible to predict what a district is going to receive. Pupil transportation timeline. So your aid is paid in late January from the previous year. The majority of the aid is paid out in January. A bit is reserved so that if there are adjustments that need to be made through audits and that type of thing, there's something to kind of equalize, and then the rest of it is paid out in June. Attendance area deadline for private school students. This is a hard, fast statutory deadline. April 1 is the deadline for those districts to have those private schools to have an attendance area submitted to the public school district. Private pupil list deadline is May 15th. That one is more fluid. If your school board decides that they want to go to, like as Ben said, September 1st, or if they want to consider it on a case-by-case basis, that's really up to you. But I again would really highly encourage having that in a policy so that you're consistent. The reporting for pupil transportation opens mid-May. and is open until late June. High cost transportation aid is paid in mid-June. The summer school report opens in mid-August to late September. And again, that's the first report in the fiscal year. And if you have a transportation audit, it will be in the fall, and it's usually every 3 years.
All right, now just a couple final slides. So I'm actually going to start on the right side for what DPI does and what we don't do. So what we actually do regarding transportation is collect data from the districts, and we use that data to calculate and distribute the transportation and high-cost transportation aid payments in a timely manner as prescribed by state statute. We do review and approve UHT plans. After appeal, we will determine UHT areas and parent contract amounts. And we provide extensive information to everybody, community members, school districts, legislators, both on our website and with specific requests. Some things we do not oversee are bus route duration and bus stop placement and any safety issues. We have nothing to do with bus discipline and public schools collaborating with private schools. Like Kathy mentioned, with scheduling, bell schedules, when breaks happen, winter break, spring break, that is important to work with the private schools directly. The Department of Transportation are the ones who are responsible for driver and equipment standards. Also, direct payments, i.e. parent contracts to parents or private schools, that is between parents and public schools or private schools and public schools. DPI does not play a role in those interactions. Caitlin,
The only aid that DPI pays directly to parents is open enrollment, where the open enrolled parent, the parent of the open enrolled student, requests assistance with getting the student to school. That is paid directly out through open enrollment, not through us. That's the only time that DPI makes a direct payment to a parent.
Excellent point. Caitlin, question come in?
Two. So this is regarding a special education child who has specialized transportation in their IEP that was accepted to the district through open enrollment. Accepted for open enrollment to another school district. Is the accepting district required to provide transportation?
I think
honestly, I would need to connect with our special ed colleagues on that one.
That is a good question.
Yes, it is. Please,
good job, Mike
please reach out to us. That is a great question. But when it gets into that level of granularity with special ed and transportation and IEPs, we have colleagues in other areas of the agency that we definitely connect with.
Awesome. Next question. Can the public district determine the drop time for students? What if there is a disagreement? Is that in regards to for a private school drop time?
What's getting off the bus? What?
I'm assuming that they mean if they pick the kids up in the morning and they drop the kids off at the school, and that's the time, the drop time. Again,
start time for school. That's what he said.
Okay. So the district is able to determine the routes and schedules. But this is again another thing where you want to try to work with your private schools so that there is not contention here. If there's a disagreement, it's really something that you need to work out with the private school. It's not something that we have any jurisdiction over.
All right. I know we have 1 minute. So some recently asked questions that are also somewhat frequently asked. Yes, you do need to transport private school students when public school is not in session, but as Kathy mentioned, do try to mesh your calendars as much as possible. Cooperation is key. Can you mix transportation methods for private school students? Absolutely. Many districts have some private school students on actual buses, yet they provide parent contracts to families of other private school students. Regarding parent contracts, is the minimum $5 times the distance in miles mentioned in statute per day? Nope. And it's not even per each leg of a round trip. It is a single leg of the journey. It is never actually used in the calculation really for the minimum. But next month, there will be a full presentation on parent contracts at the accounting conference. If a family has multiple kids going to the same private school, must you provide parent contracts for each kid? Yes, except in a first-class city, and Milwaukee is the only first-class city in the state. And as I mentioned, if a student does not reside directly in a UHT zone but must pass through it to get to school in under 2 miles, are they entitled to transportation? Yes, they are. Now, we have a bunch of wonderful resources on our website. Again, I'm putting in a plug for statute 121.54. Highly recommend reading through the entire thing just once. Take a look at some of the footnotes even. There's some interesting history in there for the evolution of pupil transportation laws. We welcome any questions. I realize it is 1:01 p.m. I thank you for joining us. For any general questions, please reach out to DippyFin for our school financial services. But the new point of contact for any and all transportation issues is our colleague Stephanie Durant, who is on the webinar today. There is her contact email and phone number. So if there's any final questions, we're happy to take them now.
Yes. I just emailed it to you because it's pretty specialized. But so the school district has been requested to start transportation for a private specialized education facility. Does the district set the amount and times of pickup and drop off during the school day? They run a half-day program, this new private entity.
Again, we'll have to talk when it's that specific and if IEPs are involved and so on. That's an added layer of detail that we have to go into. Great question.
I copied you in on some emails
Okay.
with this person so that hopefully they can get the answers they need specific to their district. With that, I see no other open questions. Our next Transportation Tidbits will be around bus driver recruitment, hiring A to Z, and that will be in April. We are working to finalize which Wednesday in April that will be. Otherwise, I hope to see many of you at the Federal Funding Conference at the end of this month or at the Accounting Conference in March. And with that, thank you, Ben and Kathy. Have a great day, everybody, and we will see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.